Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Kickback Science. Today we have a very special guest on here to talk to us about a topic that we've been getting a lot of questions about. We have Dr. Richard Kreider, a professor and director of the Exercise and Sports Nutrition Lab and the director of the Human Clinical Core Lab at Texas A&M University, and a absolute pioneer in the field of creatine research. Dr. Kreider's dedicated decades of his career in this field. He's published over 300 peer-reviewed articles, book chapters. I actually, Dr. Kreider, was reading your CV beforehand, and 91 pages, absolutely incredible. So, needless to say, you've established yourself in this field, and it's so awesome to have somebody with such expertise come talk to us about such a hot topic. So, thanks for coming on today, and how you doing?
Very well. Thank you very much.
Good. And this couldn't have come at a better time either, because, we don't get political on this podcast at all, but there was a recent bill proposed to try to manage some or put some control over supplements for children, adolescents, individuals under 18 years old, and not allow the sale of these supplements, it looks like. And unfortunately, that includes creatine. And so I saw the International Society of Sports Nutrition, and you and your colleagues put out a press release highlighting how this is quite a concern if we're going to try to limit the sale of something that's so important to our health that could cause a lot of problems down the line. I don't want to get too far into that yet, but I just want to highlight this is the timing of this is perfect. But before we talk about that, I want to hear from you about how you got into creatine research. Where did this start?
Well, I did my PhD at Southern Miss, and as I came out, I was very interested in strength conditioning and nutrition. That's the reason why I got a PhD. And as I was coming out, I had a chance to work at Old Dominion University with Mel Williams, who was kind of considered the grandfather or father of sports nutrition. He wrote several books on ergogenic aids and those type of things. So we had a chance to do some of that work and establish ourselves with some publications. In 93 or 94, I was presenting at the American Dietetic Association meeting in Atlanta. And I got contacted before the conference by a guy named Anthony Almada. He's one of the founders of EAS, which was a very large sports nutrition company. And they had been monitoring studies in England and talking with some of the researchers out at the University of Nottingham and the Roger Harris and Eric Holtman and that group. And before the 92 Olympics, they had done some studies where they showed that oral creatine supplementation could increase muscle creatine content. And a lot of people, a few of the British athletes, world champion, 100-meter runner, et cetera, were taking creatine during the Olympics in 92. And they asked if we'd be interested in looking at this literature and see if it's something we would want to do a study on. So I actually met at that conference, and I looked at the literature. I'd seen a few of the papers come out, but nobody had done anything in athletes. Nobody had done anything in the United States. And so in order for establishing an ergogenic aid, you really have to do studies in athletes doing the type of events and competition and training that they are on, whether it's really going to enhance them. So we did our first study funded by EAS, which was the company he was representing, and found some tremendous advantages by adding creatine to a carbohydrate protein powder compared to even higher calorie. Back in the day, you gained weight by eating more and lifting. That was about it. And maybe adding some protein. And so we found that adding creatine to that with a lower calorie approach actually did better than really a lot of the calories that was typically loading. So that started, I guess, in 94, and then we did studies one after another, and the data were very clear. It could increase muscle mass, strength, power during training. And so we were the first ones in the United States to show in athletes that this could actually improve strength, power, sprint performance. And that kind of launched the whole creatine as a dietary supplement for sports. And so we had been doing studies all along, and there had been some reports of side effects and those type of things. So we said, we're getting it 25 grams a day for 84 days during football practice in Memphis. I mean, it is hot. And they're doing high intensity, D1 athletes and a bunch of guys in the NFL that were in those studies. And it's like scratching, just we hadn't seen any of this. So we actually did a safety study for 21 months and looked at those taking creatine versus not. I found it actually lowered a lot of those problems. And so over the years, we had been positioned as one of the top, most active research groups in the United States. And then over the years, I've been able to help start the International Society of Sport Nutrition, and we did um, supplement reviews. And one of our position stands, our first position stand, actually was on creatine supplementation, because there had been so good convincing data, but there had still been a lot of anecdotal reports in the media and things about potential problems. So we did that in 2007. We did an update in 2017, and over the years, a long story short, is we're now finding that creatine has all these potential health benefits. And so a lot of the research over the last 10, 15 years is how can we use creatine in clinical populations, help reduce risk to disease, maintain muscle, even in pregnancy. And so that's what we've been focusing on. And I chair the scientific advisory board for ALSCHEM, which is for creatine for health. And so we're trying to get the word out about the benefits of creatine on health throughout the lifespan.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I saw that you and your colleagues had put out another update in 2021 with a lot of those misconceptions. And it seems to be that that's where this field is headed. And clearly it is. But I think back to, over a decade ago when I started taking creatine, and the conversations were usually about like, oh, it's performance based, and that's what most people think. It's so I can lift heavier, it's so I can build stronger, or so I can be stronger, so I can build more muscle. And it never really seemed to be something that people considered for anything else. But it's incredible to see all these health benefits, and it sounds like there's not a lot of negative aspects of creatine supplementation.
No, in fact, there's now data through third trimester pregnancy, all the way up to very older individuals, and even large NHANES database analysis on what happens if you have too little creatine in your diet and how that impairs health. And if you have normal levels or a little bit higher than normal levels, then it could actually improve health and reduce a lot of chronic issues. So the focus, though, had always been, well, it's just for athletes. It's for muscle building. But one of the efforts we've been trying to do is this coalesce all these health and medical related studies and get the word out through timely reviews and our conference on creatine for health, which is the next one's in a couple weeks in Germany. And then put it in the medical literature, get out lay articles. We have a YouTube channel, creatineforhealth.com, and just trying to get the information out so that people can make an informed decision about whether it's something they want to use for just general health, help manage disease, or improve rehabilitation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So before we get into, different applications for creatine specifically, can you break down for us, when somebody's supplementing with creatine, what are the physiological implications of that? What's occurring within their body when you supplement creatine? And then we'll kind of segue into how it applies to different diseases.
So a little background on what creatine is and how it's involved in energy metabolism. You get creatine mainly from meat and fish, but you have to have about a pound to get 1 gram or so. And we need about 2 to 4 grams per day. And so that's a lot of meat, a lot of fish, a lot of calories, a lot of fat. So it's not as a convenient and affordable way to get a lot of creatine. So your body actually can make creatine from some amino acids, but it can only maintain enough or make enough to maintain about half of your creatine stores. So you think of it as a gas tank. You're running around on a normal diet with about 50 to 60% full. And when you add extra creatine in the diet, efficiently through creatine supplementation, you're filling the muscle up with creatine and its energy source, phosphocreatine. And anytime you do intense exercise or the cell needs energy, it uses adenosine triphosphate, ATP, you've probably heard of ATP, and the PC, the phosphocreatine, is used to replenish the ATP. So if you're doing a sprint, for example, you use ATP and you're breaking phosphocreatine and you're turning it over and over and over again so you can maintain a sprint before you start fatiguing or relying on energy sources. So we know the cell during high metabolic demand needs a lot of phosphocreatine to keep the ATP stores up. We also now know that under medical conditions where there is a problem getting oxygen to the mitochondria, or there's been some enzyme deficiency, you don't produce or store enough creatine, or there's if you get stroke or head injury or those type of things where there's a lack of oxygen and blood supply, that creatine and phosphocreatine serve as a very important source as backup energy to help reduce the damage associated with that ischemia. And so because of that, and because every cell uses creatine and under stressful conditions, it's needed to a greater degree, there's a lot of clinical populations that may benefit as well. And so the whole point of creatine supplementation is get that energy store up to optimal levels to near 100% or a little bit better than that if you can take creatine with a few other nutrients. And then you have full energy availability to withstand trauma, withstand high-intensity exercise, and be able to recover quickly between sets. And if you get a head concussion or something, those cells that are ischemic, don't have enough oxygen, can withstand that trauma and have a better survival capability. So that's kind of the rationale behind creatine supplementation.
Sure. Yeah. And off of that a little bit. So you talked about making sure that your cells have enough reserve of the phosphocreatine and being able to provide that energy in the setting of ischemia. And how quickly do you deplete creatine stores? Let's say if not necessarily in an ischemic setting, but if I'm going to go out and I'm going to do an all-out sprint, how quickly am I wiping out those creatine stores?
About 10 seconds.
Okay.
So the first 1 or 2 seconds, you use the available ATP in the muscle, and that doesn't last long. So as that's broken down to produce the energy and give free energy, you have to have the phosphocreatine break that energy down to be able to resynthesize. So the better you can turn it over, use your ATP, replenish it with the PC, you can last longer during a sprint. An untrained person, though, starts out sprinting 1 second, now they're dependent on the PC. And an untrained person may go another 4, 5, 6 seconds before they start slowing down and have to rely on breaking down carbohydrates as a source of fuel. And so you can watch somebody sprint, start real fast, and then 50, 60 yards, and start slowing down, right? Whereas if you are creatine loaded, you can last longer before you start slowing down. And between sprints, most sports are sprint recovery. Between sprints, you're breathing heavily to produce oxygen, and that oxygen, extra energy, is used to replenish the PC store so that you're ready for the next sprint. And so having more phosphocreatine in the muscle allows you to handle sprints and sprint longer and allow you to recover faster. And so that improves the quality of your workout, the quality of your training, leading to better training adaptations over time.
And does it play a role in recovery post-workout too, being able to, if we're better able to increase ATP and after we go through some sort of resistance training, our muscle kind of demands quite a bit. Do we see creatine help with that as far as
there is some data showing that if you do, for example, a 30-kilometer run, a marathon run or somebody,
mm-hmm.
you go out and run, you have less muscle damage, and so that helps with recovery. As far as energy go, you'll recover from intense sprints faster, and having extra ability to restore the energy allows for the cells to restore. So your acute recovery should be faster, and because it allows for more work to be done, your training adaptations typically are better, or you have less muscle damage when you do intense workout because of this protective effect from creatine that other systems are involved with.
We did an episode on protein, and one of the things we talked about was Protein to me, it seems similar to creatine in the sense that there just seems to be these positive benefits. People think of protein supplementation as being something only athletes are doing, but the reality is everyone should be supplementing if they're not meeting the required amount of protein. People think it's damaging to the kidneys, etc. But one of the things we talked about in that episode was how our protein intake shouldn't just be a percentage of calories. We have a specific amount that we need to meet day to day. And if people are restricting calories, they shouldn't be decreasing protein. There's this absolute amount. Is that the same with creatine? And I guess what I'm asking is to get into the dosage, but is there an absolute minimum that we do need to hit?
Yes. So every day, your body, as you do exercise and the more muscle mass you have, the more activity you do, you have greater turnover of creatine. Every day, on average, a person will break down about 1 to 2 grams of creatine. And it is released as creatinine, often misunderstood as creatine, but the breakdown of creatine in the body is naturally creatinine. So the more muscle you have, the more activity you have, more creatinine breakdown because you've actually used and broken down some of the creatine from muscle contraction. So just to replenish that, you need about 1 to 2 grams on top of what the body's capable of synthesizing on its own. So everybody needs at least 1 to 2 grams of creatine per day minimum just to maintain that 60% full gas tank of creatine and just have normal turnover.
Sure.
If you're doing heavy training, that need goes up. If you have more muscle mass, it goes up. And that's why we say that everybody should be getting about 2 to 4 grams of creatine in their diet per day just to maintain their creatine stores to normal levels. And if you want to increase creatine to get to that 100% level, then you need to take a lot of extra creatine for about a week and then a little bit more than needed daily to try to keep those stores at optimum and kind of top off your creatine stores every day. And so, yes, you need about 2 to 4 grams per day to maintain and to keep your creatine stores up. In a normal person, it's even greater need in a vegetarian and elder. And so actually, as you age, you don't usually eat as much protein and your creatine content goes down, or the availability of diet is less. And there are now some long-term NHANES data showing that if you get older and you're not having enough creatine in your diet, your cognitive function declines and you have much greater risk to chronic disease. Same thing with kids. Kids that don't have enough creatine in their diet don't grow as quickly. They're shorter. They have more body fat. They have less muscle mass. And in young women, we know that adequate creatine in the diet is important for just general menstrual cycle function. They have less, people who have higher creatine content, you typically have less gynecological issues. And even as you age, there are a number of diseases showing that those that have higher creatine diet have less incidence of some of these long-term diseases. And so everybody needs, we always say about 3 grams on average a day of creatine. Just to provide what the body needs. And if you're training, you probably need a little bit more. And so the best way to do that is actually not eat 3 pounds of meat or 2 pounds of meat or fish. It's very expensive, obviously, but a little teaspoon a day of creatine monohydrate costs you about 15 cents. It does a lot of health benefits.
Yeah. So it really does sound a lot like protein then. You've got this minimum intake, which right around 3 grams per day, and then you alter it depending on metabolic needs. And I'm glad you mentioned, as you age, because I think people are really hesitant still to take creatine, thinking it's just for bodybuilders. But you did bring up something that I want to touch on quick, because when I started taking creatine, people would recommend a loading phase, and you have to load and then deload with creatine. And based on what you mentioned, it sounds like you can load with creatine if you want those optimum benefits a little quicker. But do you have to load creatine?
Yeah, it depends your goals. If you're looking for just general health, probably not. Although loading does get your muscle better, higher. And we now think that you need higher doses for cognitive function. Study underway now is in older individuals getting 10 grams a day of creatine, 2 grams of 2 times 5 grams per day, because it takes a little more creatine to get into the brain, and the brain needs creatine as well. And this is why if you have higher creatine in the brain and you have a concussion or a fall or a stroke, it seems to markedly reduce the damage by having more creatine in the brain. So this is something that not only can help with cognition, but also. So generally 3 grams, 5 grams a day is plenty just for normal health. But as you get older, the studies are showing you need about 10 grams for the brain benefits. And when our first studies that we did, the best way to put muscle mass on still is what we recommend is to take about 20 grams a day of creatine with protein powders, as long as you need to gain weight. Our studies we did initially were 3 shakes a day, carbohydrate protein shakes with like 7-8 grams of creatine per serving. So they're getting 20-25 grams a day. And we did one study for 84 days. And that's, if we want to really put muscle on an athlete here, or other places have been, like taking a tight end and making them an offensive tackle to increase their draft work, and we need 30, 40 pounds, man, we just hammer the resistance training, post-exercise protein with creatine and several shakes a day until we get them where they need to be. And then we back off of that and try to maintain.
Now, is most of that due to muscle mass? This gets at another, I believe, misconception of creatine and its role that it might play in hydration status. I know that creatine uptake into the cell brings sodium with it. We retain a little water. Is any of that water weight, or is most of it actually muscle mass that they're gaining?
Great question. When we first did our studies, the muscle mass gains were so profound, people thought, and there's no way it could be it could be muscle. It's got to be some water. And the thought is now that you initially take and load with creatine, you might get some intracellular hydration that actually is a stimulant for protein synthesis. Okay. But there have been studies for 6 weeks and longer where they did muscle biopsies and actually showed increased protein content of muscle fiber. And so it's muscle, it's power, it's strength. And, we actually put some athletes 20, 30, 40 pounds of muscle with almost no fat. We had one athlete when I was at Baylor that was really tall basketball player and 195 pounds, 7-footer, and it was a twig. And within a year, we put about 48 pounds on him, and 45 of that was muscle. It was lifting, eating carbs, and protein, and adding in 3 shakes a day with creatine and protein, and the person was able to compete much more better. So, we've done a lot of that over the years, and none of the studies have looked at that type of application. Our initial studies were 4 weeks and 6 weeks, and we've done some long-term studies. But most of the studies aren't really trying to get that aggressive. And when you look at DEXA and you see 45 pounds of muscle on top of somebody after a year, it's a lot of hard work, a lot of good dieting, a lot of training, but obviously creatine helps.
Yeah, I imagine the NCAA probably was looking at seeing if there was any steroids going on with numbers like that.
Yeah, we were the first ones to use creatine in football. And the first call I got was from the University of Nebraska from Dave Ellis, who's a well-known sports nutritionist, who was the first one hired in the United States at a college. And he says, hey, I was talking to somebody, and they said, you have some data coming out. And this was like in the fall of '94. And I said, yeah, it's really impressive, and these were resistance trained men. And we put, in a month, about 2-3 kgs of muscle on these athletes lifting. And they started putting their athletes on creatine, and I won 2 national championships right in a row. And I think they skipped a year and got another one. And then we at Memphis played the University of Tennessee with Peyton Manning's last year and upset them. And we had a strength clinic in December, between their bowl game, and they were like 6th in the country, and we were not very good. We were 26-point dog. And we took them down. Bulk gold post came down in Memphis, Tennessee, right? And
Awesome.
I remember at the end of the game, going on the field and seeing Peyton, his just this illusion looked like looked in the Super Bowl after they got beat one year, just dazed.
Yeah.
And, all our strength coaches, what are you guys doing? And we shared with what we were doing, and we had everybody on protein and carbohydrate drinks with creatine, and profound response. And so they did that the next year, and they won the national championship.
The
So then
secret got out.
yeah, all of a sudden everybody starts getting a creatine, and she said, "Well, not everybody can afford this. We better, have some limitations on this." So anyway, that it can make a profound effect. So now, if you're not taking creatine as an athlete, you just are not being well advised.
Yeah.
If you are involved in any sport that has a concussion, there are studies in animals, if they feed creatine in the diet of animals and they cause concussions or strokes, the damage is about half. So you have less damage to your brain. And this is why we're looking and doing things in the military to try to get creatine in diets and MREs and things with the military to make sure that if there's blasts and those type of trauma to the head, which was a huge problem in Iraq and Afghanistan with these IEDs,
Sure.
that they're better prepared to handle that damage. So there's lots of potential benefits. And so that's why in our 2017 position status, like, listen, if you're restricting creatine for your athletes, you may be in legal jeopardy, because we know this can help reduce the severity of injury. And not only for brain concussions, there's even data in spinal cord injury. Now, you can't do those studies in humans and animals, but the data makes sense that if you were ischemia or have lack of availability and you need neuromuscular improvement, there's some benefit of taking creatine. This is why our ISSM position stance says everybody who's in contact sports, regardless of your age, ought to be taking creatine to make sure they have brain protection, let alone from all of the performance type of benefits they may get.
Now, when you're saying creatine supplementation, it seems that within the research, most of the studies are using creatine monohydrate. People can go to supplement stores, and I mean, there's creatine types and flavors and mixes of all kinds. Do you have any recommendations on what type of creatine to supplement with?
Yes, so we did a paper in 11 and updated in 22 on bioavailability of different forms of creatine. There's a lot of hype and marketing around different types of creatine. We just looked at 685 clinical trials. 95% of them have been done on creatine monohydrate. And there's only a handful that have looked at any other form, mostly to compare it to creatine monohydrate and see if there's any similarities to that, maybe a different form. And none of those studies have shown any better effect than creatine monohydrate. And since creatine monohydrate is so inexpensive, I mean, you can get a kilo for $30, last you for a whole year.
Mm-hmm.
There's really no reason to try some of these other things unless you just like the flavor or like the fact that it's with other nutrients you convenient to take it with. But all these other forms that you hear about, creatine HCl and creatine, buffered creatine, and, creatine nitrates and all these other things, when you creatine ethyl ester, when you look at comparing them to creatine monohydrate, if it releases creatine, you may get some benefit, but it's usually not nearly as much as creatine monohydrate, because 1 gram of creatine monohydrate delivers more percentage-wise of creatine than many of these other forms. It only provide about half. So you almost have to take double in some of these forms to get a similar effect if it's broken down. And there are even some things out there on the market that none of the studies show it breaks down to the blood and doesn't affect the muscle. And if it doesn't affect the muscle, it's not going to have any effect. So we recommend creatine monohydrate. You primarily have 2 sources. One's in Europe and Germany, and others in China. Because there have been some impurities in the China batches over the years, we generally recommend the German creatine as the purest. Almost all the clinical trials have been using on that. And that's one reason why we are working with Allschem, who's the main maker, to try to help people learn about creatine monohydrate, and that's the best source.
So keep it simple, stick with creatine monohydrate. I think that's the problem with the supplement industry is that
Yeah, and
it's a money game a little bit. People are
yeah,
coming up with all these things.
a lot of the misinformation, unfortunately, has been kind of propagated by companies trying to get market share.
Yeah.
So, for example, there's one gummy out there that's a creatine HCl. Nothing wrong with creatine HCl, but it's not as much creatine delivered as creatine monohydrate. And if you're honest about it, okay, it may be a decent source, but they're making claims like you only need 1/3 or less than half of the dosage, and it doesn't cause all these side effects. And it's like, you don't need to do all of that. Just tell us what you know and then do some studies to show it works before you try to say it's better than other forms. So that's unfortunate. We have a lot of that. I go on Instagram, I see these things all the time, and it's like, show me your data. If you think it's better, do a comparative study. If it works better, wonderful.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, don't make claims to try to, go against the science and misinform the public, because that's what happens.
Right. Some of these folks can be so darn convincing too. And that's the problem. So you talked about the minimum requirement. Is there any adverse effects to having too much creatine? Is there a cap, something people should watch out for?
Well, not that I'm aware of. I mean, there have been studies in some clinical populations that have given up to 30 grams per day for 14 years.
Wow.
Right? For kids that don't make normal creatine, they don't have the enzymes to synthesize creatine, they have to have a lifetime on higher creatine intake. And there's like 3 different issues with either not having the enzymes or not having the transporter. And the ones without the enzymes must have higher creatine than that. The transporter is a little bit more tricky. And so, but they're on diets, and there have been studies following these kids all the way through their lifespan, now over 30 years. And you also had some very large clinical trials done in Europe on Parkinson's and other type of diseases. Didn't show as much efficacy in Parkinson's, but they have a safety profile of up to 8 years of taking up to 30 grams per day, 10 grams to 30 grams. And so that with all the exercise data and the wide world usage of creatine, it's very low instance of any problem. So, we recommend take what your body needs and then maybe a little bit more. I don't think you need to have, more than 10 grams a day after you're loaded. But we did have some studies where large athletes need more creatine to maintain the stores. And so when we have our 300, 120 kilo offensive and defensive linemen, they're taking 10 grams a day. Because we had done studies in football players showing that if we only gave them 5 grams a day, they didn't have any in the urine, meaning they were absorbing everything. And so you need more the bigger you are, the more muscle mass you have. Most people, 3 to 5 grams is enough, but for athletes, maybe 5 to 10 is what we usually recommend. And then, as I said, as elderly, for brain effects, we think it needs to be about 10 grams a day. At least that's what the studies showing more effect on brain are usually the higher dosages.
Where are we at in the literature with creatine supplementation and dementia-related diseases?
Yeah, that's really interesting. We've known creatine has neuromuscular advantages. So typically, if there's neuromuscular diseases that affect muscle function, things like muscular dystrophy and those type of things, creatine seems to have some very good adjunct therapeutic use on top of some of the medications they're on, and may offset negative effects like from prednisone and things that would cause muscle waste, or corticosteroids, things like that. So if it's a muscle-related disease, it seems to have benefit. The nerve damage type of diseases like Parkinson's and others seem to be not as much effective. However, we know that now with long-term use and higher amounts in the diet, people who are older, who've had higher creatine in their diet, NHANES database studies show that they tend to have less progression to mild cognitive impairment. And when they are given cognitive challenge tests, those that had higher creatine in their diet are able to do better on those kind of cognitive challenges. So we're actually doing a series of studies now where we're taking older individuals as they're approaching the point where they notice cognitive impairment. Not quite clinically diagnosed yet, not going to be put on medication, but they're noticing they're not remembering and they're starting to think that maybe I'm starting to slip. And putting them on creatine with exercise and diet to try to help with their body composition and health status, but then specifically looking at how this affects the brain and how this affects cognitive function. And if you look at the data in older folks that have been done so far, there seems to be some cognitive benefit of taking higher doses of creatine, but more studies are being done, which is why we're trying to look at it. And we're even doing a study using the precursor to creatine, which is called guanidinoacetic acid, GAA. And some studies out of Serge Osijek's lab shows that a couple of grams of that a day works even better in increasing creatine in the brain. And so we got another study. We're first going to look at the cognitive benefits of GAA, then we're going to combine it with exercise and creatine or placebo to see if that added GAA may even cause a little bit more effect. The data on GAA is just coming out, but the brain effects of increasing creatine content, theoretically, if you increase creatine in the brain, your cognition should be better. So that's why we're doing that study.
And then theoretically, you'd be able to supplement with the GEA specifically for folks who have the cognitive decline.
Yes. And so that, we know exercise and blood flow is important for brain function and doing cognitive challenges, reading, word puzzles, all these things as you get older, very helpful. But we think it's a combination of exercise, diet, and then some strategic nutritional supplements that might help and to at least delay the onset. So our first series, this is actually a huge study, multi-year study being funded by the Wood Next Foundation. And our first study is on creatine with or without exercise. Then we're doing GAA on cognition. Then we're adding GAA and creatine. And then we're going to start adding nutrients to help brain health, antioxidants, anti-inflammatories. And the idea is if as you're getting older, you can identify exercise and some things that affect brain energy and reduce inflammation and improve antioxidant status, you should not have as much response, or you should be able to delay that mild cognitive impairment. And we just got done doing a study on another type of cognitive nootropic in elderly that are starting to experience mild cognitive impairment issues, and showed that these type of things can make an impact. And we mentioned in the paper that we're wanting to combine exercise, diet for weight management, as well as for energy and nutrients in the brain. And the reviewers are like, this is exactly what we need to be doing for aging. We need to not just treat the symptoms, we need to be able to help slow the progression. And that's where we think that active aging, sport nutrition's gone from athletes, now it's up to aging and healthy, vibrant aging. We think that those strategies will be very helpful as people age.
We get a lot of patients who come in for Medicare wellness checks, and we'll go through a slums survey and see how they're doing as far as cognitive function. And as far as like next steps with those patients, it's completely dependent on the clinician. It'd be really cool to have a standardized lifestyle prescription for those patients. Man, what an impact that would make.
I think that's where we got to get to. If we could prescribe exercise and get reimbursement for engagement at workout places and check attendance and those type of things, and then supplements that we know can be helpful. Mm-hmm. I think we do have a lot of benefit as we age and postponing a lot of the chronic diseases and cognitive impairment and reducing falls because you're stronger and have better balance. All those things are very important. So when we talk to older folks, it's about higher protein, resistance training, creatine, and then adding some health nutrients that affect cognition, call them nootropics. And so if you do some of these, so our combination that we're going to look at first is exercise, higher protein diet to promote effective weight loss, maintain, build muscle, add creatine, add maybe GAA if that ends up working, add anti-inflammatory like curcumin, add antioxidants like omega-3 fatty acids, and then add things like acetylcholine and fucoxanthin or paraxanthin that can affect cognition acutely as well as over time. And so that kind of combination of lifestyle, exercise, nutrition, and health are all integrated. And we think if we get people to practice some of those healthy behaviors as they age and use scientifically based nutrition to give them some advantage, they may have a higher quality of life. They may not notice any problem. They may be able to maintain strength and pick kids up and play with their grandkids, and walk and do the things they want to do and improve really wellness and quality of life. That's really what our goal is.
I feel like that's where so much of our attention should shift in just the whole healthcare industry. I think a lot more needs to be on prevention, because a lot of these chronic conditions, like you said, they are preventable. We can attenuate symptoms here. Before we finish it up, I do want to kind of dive into the press release that you and your colleagues put out from the ISSN, and talk about the role that creatine plays in children and adolescents. And we're trying to put a halt on supplement intake with children, what impact that could have.
Yeah. So there have been, over the last maybe 5 or 8 years or so, some efforts at state level. And usually it's from people that mean well, but don't know the science. And so they try to say, well, if some supplements may make people not eat properly, or, whatever, that it might lead to eating disorders, and this may be a reason. So let's just not have any kids take supplements. Let's make sure the parents buy them, and we don't let kids purchase them. Creatine is so important, and so is protein. As kids are aging, as you go through maturation and you're going through hormonal adaptations, you have a really important, greater need for protein, greater need for creatine, and a number of other nutrients just for healthy aging. We know kids now, starting from the 3rd trimester of development of the baby, need creatine. They actually take creatine from the mom. And so we actually are using creatine supplements for mom to make sure the baby gets enough. And then we have studies being done that in the first few years of life, the extra creatines, even in adding it to breast milk or, formula, baby formulas, may be really important. We now have an AI, adequate intake for creatine in infants.
Wow.
Whether they're breastfeeding or not, because it's so important. And we know that kids that don't have enough creatine in their diet as they age through adolescence are shorter, less muscle mass, greater body fat. And there's even some suggestion there may be some connection to cognitive deficits and even things like autistic responses. Now, that needs to be studied more detail. But there's some suggestions that lack of creatine in the diet of children delay their cognitive and physical development. And so there have been these large databases. We know it's important. And the fact is, though, that with interest in eating, less meats and things, there's been actually a lowering of the creatine intake in kids. And so if you pass laws that will restrict the availability of a kid to purchase a protein drink with creatine at a store, or can't go to like I was in high school, we buy our supplements at a GNC or some type of sports place, and I got to pull my parents down. They don't know what's going to happen. And you're just going to end up having kids, in my view, listen to the people at the gym and buy steroids rather than taking things that can be healthy. And so we think that's the worst thing that we should do. We should try to increase the availability of creatine, high quality protein, as kids grow, not restrict it. And the restriction, people think, well, there must be something wrong with it. No, there's not. It's a very healthful. All the data on safety is very clear, very safe, and can have some long-term health impacts. And so a bunch of us got together. We're seeing this thing happen. It's like, this doesn't make sense. And even in Texas, there's some legislation trying to propose this. And so we say, we need to step up and say, all right, we've already have our position stands, but obviously we need to make a more vocal response. And so a number of us got together. I wrote the letter. We all contributed to it. It has physicians and dietitians and scientists and everybody that signed off on it. And we did a press release from the ISSN and basically saying that it's safe, it should not be restricted. We'll be encouraging our kids to consume creatine and protein. And at the same time, we want to restrict that. We have no problems with kids buying high-fat meals or going to, coffee houses and buying 800-calorie, grand latte with whipped cream and all this stuff in it, right? And with huge caffeine. None of that's a problem. But, we got to restrict creatine, which is kids are taking or wanting to improve their strength, improve their fitness, those type of things. So we have launched this. We wanted to put the facts out so people will be aware of them to try to reduce the misinformation about creatine. We have our Creatine for Health conference going to be in Germany in a few weeks. You can watch it online or attend it in person. We'll go through all the health benefits again with all the latest research from people throughout the world. And we also going to present a huge safety paper that's about to be published. And it basically looked at all the clinical trials and compared those on placebo versus those on creatine and found that the people who are taking creatine in many cases have a less incidence of side effects than people on placebos, which is consistent with what's been shown before. And we then looked at all the adverse event reports throughout the world, 28.4 million, and the percentage of reports on creatine at all is 0.00072%.
Jeez.
And then half of those, when you looked at what they claimed, were misreported and didn't even have a creatine in it when you look at the products they were mentioned. So
Wow.
It's like there's nothing there, folks. And then we even have a segment where we did an internet assessment, social media evaluation to look at sentiment. And what's interesting is most people have a very positive view about creatine, but there's a very small segment that think it's bad for you, like 2 to 3 or 4%. And it's a slight difference. So obviously, the social media is not conveying what the science is correctly. We've got to do a better job to getting that out. And so that's one of the reasons why some of us are appearing on podcasts like this, get the word out. Hey, this is safe, it's effective, can have a lot of health benefits. Read the literature. Go to creatineforhealth.com. You can read all about all the different applications, and you can make an informed decision about whether it's something to use or not.
Thanks for sharing that. We'll link to creatineforhealth.com as well as the press release. And then on creatineforhealth.com, is that where we could find a link if people want to tune in virtually or attend in person to that conference?
Yes, it's the Creatine for Health 2025. And we have a lineup of amazing speakers, all aspects. We're going to look at aging, women's health, metabolic health, how it plays a role in disease, exercise, safety. There are lots of different areas. We're going to be publishing the main session talks and then have a bunch of original research that's also presented at the conference. We usually do this every 5 years, the last 20, 30 years. But there's so much data coming out, we needed to do another one. We did one in 21, kind of COVID. Now we're going to do another. So probably every 3 years, we're going to start doing this to get the word out.
I'll definitely be tuning in, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners will as well. Before we close out, is there any specific area of creatine research that I haven't asked about that you're really excited about for the future?
Wow. I'd say 2 areas. One is creatine for women during pregnancy. More research is needed, but we do know that there's greater creatine need. And I think it's going to be like a folate type of recommendation.
Wow.
Over time. Okay. And there's also, I think, the first few years, adding a little creatine to the diets of these children as they grow is probably going to be important. So that's one area. Abby Smith and at UNC Chapel Hill, as well as Stacey Ellery in Australia have been doing a lot of really great work in this area. So that's one. I think women's health is going to be a big one. The next thing is there's some great data on cancer. There are cancers and tumors. You may not have heard this one yet. Cancers and tumors that when your tumor is growing, there's a greater, there's a lack of creatine that's facilitating the abnormal metabolic activity for the growth. So they've taken and done animal studies and cellular in vitro studies where they've provided creatine and it slows the growth of certain tumors.
Wow.
So Lily Yang's group out of UCLA and others have been doing this type of work. It's going to be fascinating to see if it providing energy, optimal energy, prevents the growth, okay, of tumor. And there's been really good work on women and people who get cancer using creatine and resistance training during chemo to help maintain muscle mass and prevent the loss of tissue, and then also in recovery from breast cancer. And so there's a lot of really interesting data on management of cancer patients, but probably the most really cool thing is the potential slowing of the tumor growth. A lot needs to be done, but that's really interesting. Last one I'll say, there's a whole bunch. You've heard of long COVID.
Yep.
Mental fog, fatigue, don't want to do much, okay?
Sure.
Still a lot of that. And Serge Ostrish's group did a really fascinating study, just came out, where they gave creatine to post-COVID, long COVID patients, and their outcomes were markedly improved. And so you might see that chronic fatigue syndromes and things that providing creatine can have some benefit as well. Just a taste. I mean, there's so much really cool stuff.
And just thinking about creatine and how it plays a role in every cell, and hearing you talk about cancer, that'll be really interesting. And but you touched on resistance training and supplementation and preserving muscle mass. I mean, so many patients when they go through chemo and radiation are getting cachectic and just wasting of the muscle, which predisposes them to so many other issues. And then with the long COVID and the role it would play in fatigue, that makes sense. Now I wonder, does creatine also play a role in immune function? Because our immune cells are going to be using creatine as well, right?
Great question. Yeah, great question. So there's also some really cool new data coming out of Dr. Drescher's lab at Omaha, Creighton University. And you can read her papers also in creatineforhealth.com, and others have come out since that. But we're finding that creatine plays a really important role in maintaining immune function and helping the cell. It's almost like a glutamine. It helps the cell provide energy so it can withstand limitations that are stressing the immune system. So there's actually some effects on T cell function, the T helpers, all that. Mm-hmm. And so that's another really emerging area of fascinating research on creatine. Any type of cell that may have diminished energy capabilities seems to have a benefit by having extra creatine to it. And so that's another area that's fascinating.
I guess what I should have started the podcast with is, what doesn't creatine do? Because that's pretty amazing. I'm gonna recap here and just correct me if I'm wrong in stating that, in summary, it seems that everyone would benefit from supplementing with creatine, and the recommended intake is somewhere right around 3 milligrams per day, from 2 to 4. But that changes depending on if you're exercising more, you're going to want to increase that. And if you're an elderly individual, somebody with dementia, you're going to want to increase that even more, somewhere around 10 per day. And creatine plays a role in preventing dementia, attenuating dementia, I should say, building muscle, power, strength, the athletic performance stuff we know, but now we're starting to see that it plays a role in all these other diseases, cancer, and I imagine metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease, and you name it. And there doesn't seem to be any adverse events that we're aware of at this point based on the data. So am I correct in saying that?
Yes. And so what we recommend, the only thing I would add is, if you look at the NHANES data, the groups that had the threshold amount in a diet that led to greater health problems versus improved is a minimum of about 1 gram per day in the diet. So not from what your body synthesizes. So I think that would be the minimal threshold just to maintain health. And then the study showing that people who have 2 or 3 grams a day seem to have much better health outcomes. And so that's why the 3 grams a day is kind of the average for health. And then there are certain populations that maybe need a little more. So it's an amazing area. It started out as a sports supplement to improve sprinting and performance. And it's one example where, there's a lot of applications for just general health and then maybe even for some disease management when used prudently.
Yeah, that's so cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time on your day. I know you're extremely busy. You wear a lot of hats, and I'm just super appreciative, and I know all our listeners are for you to sit down with us and share your expertise in such an awesome area. And we'll all be tuning in. I'll link to your website as well as some of these research articles in the episode description. So I really appreciate it, Dr. Kreider.
Thank you very much. Take care.